Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. So in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing a book, which is The Takeover by T.L. Swan. I received this book as a NetGalley ARC. I didn't really know that much about it before I requested it. I have never read another T.L. Swan book, so I'm not sure how this one compares to any of the author's other works. This book just came out, so it's available now, August 27th, and let's get started. So I just finished this book like 10 minutes ago, so I'm going to do my best to kind of give you a comprehensible review, but I'm just kind of winging it. So here we go. So the summary is that the main female character is Claire, and she is a 38-year-old mom. She has 3 sons. She's a widow, and she is trying to run the media advertising company that she and her husband founded years ago, and he has passed about 5 years ago. So she is just kind of, her company is struggling, and the book opens where she takes a meeting with this guy who's the main male lead, Tristan, and his company wants to buy her company because he knows that her company is like barely staying afloat. She basically tells that guy to go to hell. Because she's determined to like make her company work. This is just a rough patch. She wants to have a legacy to give to her sons. A few months later, they're at a business conference in France. And surprise, surprise, guess who is the guest speaker? It's this guy, Tristan, because he's this, gazillionaire, successful media person. So Claire and Tristan have these like snarky words. They're making eyes at each other. The sexual tension is off the charts. They end up sleeping together at the conference, and then he says, well, that wasn't like that, one night or 2 nights, wasn't enough. Let's go to Paris for the weekend and just have this whole big sex fest. So they do, and Claire is like, well, this is fun. This guy is sex on a stick, and he knows how to, give it to me good. And she's basically like enjoying this weekend in Paris. And it's just this like whirlwind where she can pretend to sort of be someone else. And she's hoping to use this to as the entree back into the dating world. And she knows it'll never work. This guy has a different woman on his arm who's like a supermodel every month. She knows that he is super busy being a CEO of his company. She lives on Long Island in a house with a yard and has these 3 kids. The sex is great, but this is gonna be a fun weekend. And so then it's sort of a surprise when they get back to their normal lives and he is pursuing her. And she's like, this isn't gonna work. This isn't gonna work. This isn't gonna work. So that's sort of the first maybe quarter of the book. And so the rest of the book is them trying to figure out if they can make things work and how to do that. It's a romance, so, they end up together in the end and they fall in love. I don't feel like that's really a spoiler. But I did not really like this book. It is 477 pages long, according to Goodreads, and I felt every single one of those pages. I felt like when I was reading this, I would read a good chunk and then I would look and I'd be like, oh, I only moved 7%. And so it felt like I wanted it to get going. I don't know why. It just was like, let's go. But also at the same time, I also don't understand that because I hated the writing. The writing was overly basic and simple to me. I'm not an English major. I don't know how to evaluate good versus bad writing. But the writing in this was just I felt like I was getting whiplash. First Tristan was like, nope, I don't want to have kids. I'm not, I shouldn't be interested in this woman with her kids, even though she is so fiery. And then he just can't stop thinking about her. So he does a literal about face where he's like, well, if I'm going to make this work, I'm going to make it work. So he goes from not wanting anything to do with her except for the sex, and like, but then he's like, well, I can't live without her, so let's like whole hog go all in. Okay, I felt like I was like, okay, I had to quickly get on board with that. And then like Claire, the same thing. Like she is like resistant. She's, oh, this is just a fling. And then she's super resistant to Tristan because she's like, I don't want to like let this guy into my life or into my heart if it's never going to work out, which she's convinced it won't. And so then, so even though he keeps being like, let's try, she's like, nope, nope, nope. And then suddenly she's like, well, I love him, so like, let's try to make it work. And I was like, okay. I felt like there was, I mean, I'm not a mom either, and I'm not a widow, but like, it felt like there was never, like, all of the conversations that should have happened about him meeting her kids and how they would potentially like co-parent in a relationship never happened. Tristan just shows up and is dropping F-bombs left, right, and center. And he's just like, oh, I'm here like babysitting your kids while you're on a date with another man. And she's just like, oh, how sweet. And I'm like, what? Like, this is creepy and weird. And then like, you know, basically the main female character, Claire, she's like, everything that Tristan does that to me was like, this is weird. Why is he doing this without talking to her? Or like, why is he taking such a hand in the boys' like lives or like in her life and just like doing stuff? And she's just like, isn't this so wonderful? He's like trying to connect to my kids. And I was just like, this is kind of weird. And like the middle child, Harry, is sort of a troublemaker, and he keeps getting in trouble in school, and he's sort of a prankster, and he keeps like sneaking out, that kind of thing. You know, he's a real handful. And so like when he's the one who's most resistant to Tristan kind of coming into their lives, and so he like plays a prank on Tristan, and so Tristan is like literally like spouts off to his, I mean, I guess it's, you know, like it's private, like Tristan is spouting off to Tristan's brother, but like he's just like calling this kid like a little MFer. And I'm just like, if I ever found out that my potential boyfriend like was like basically calling all of my kids like little snot-nosed brats and threatening them with boarding school, like, sorry, that doesn't seem like a relationship I want to work. There's just so many moments where Claire is like, what a sweet family scene here. And I'm like, he just like insinuated himself into your life without you guys ever having a talk about this. It just was weird. And Claire was like such a dependable, like she started off so like realistic, like I have to think about what's right for my kids and what's right for my company, and like I'm gonna go into this like being responsible. And then like her immaturity just like tanked, and like literally from as soon as they started having sex, like every other line that he says to her, she giggles. I tried to do a search function through my arc for the word giggled, and it came up with 0 results, which I know is not true because I think it's because it's an arc. I think she giggled. I think that's probably the most common word in this book except for the F-bomb. And it was so annoying. It was so annoying for her to just like, oh, like Tristan's like, I'm saying this inappropriate thing that I shouldn't be saying to you about your children. And she's like, hee hee. And I was like, this is so stupid. I don't know. I just felt like it was really unrealistic for the two of them to try to make things work. And then like, I mean, like I'm all for making them work and like, you know, blended families, cool, great. I just felt like they went about it the really like kind of the wrong way, in my personal opinion, as not a parent or a widow or as trying to get with somebody who has 3 kids already established. I mentioned briefly that the writing was really obnoxious to me. I didn't really highlight that many things in this arc just because I'm still not super used to that, but there was just certain like turns of phrase that rubbed me the wrong way, where I was just like, why did you write it that way? Like, you could have very easily changed this word order and it would have made a lot more sense and flowed a lot better and sounded nicer. I don't know. That's a me thing. I don't know if it was just the mood I was in, but I was just like, why? Like, what is happening here? Let me see if I can pull up an example. In one example, it's from the female perspective, and she says, his eyes close and I feel his dick harden up against me. Why did you say harden up against me? Like, harden up against me? Harden against me? Like, it just was like weird. Like that phraseology should have been different, in my personal opinion. Also, later he calls her his horny F Master 2000, and he's talking about how he wished she wouldn't speak because he ordered one without a voice box. And I'm like 100% on board with like funny joking, but like that wasn't funny. And she's just like giggles, and I was like, what the heck? Like what? And then later, so the sort of spoiler part of this is that spoilers now, if you don't want to know, click off. Later in the book, they're together, they love each other, and he has like pulled the kids out of their like crappy local public school, and he's determined to get them into like a private ritzy school I think in the city, and he has like his limo go and pick them up every day because he's a gazillionaire and he literally just throws money at every problem. And anyway, so Tristan wants to buy a bigger, nicer house for all of them to live. And he's sort of like, he doesn't talk to Claire about it, which, okay, like, I guess he wanted it to be a surprise. I don't know. He takes her and the boys to this big house that he is considering purchasing without prepping her beforehand. She's getting more and more upset because this is not the house that she and her first husband picked out together. It's not the one that they wanted the kids to grow up in. You know, she feels like a lot of things are changing, which is understandable to me. I was like, yeah, I get it. But instead of talking to him about it, she like flies off the handle. And when she's getting more and more upset, and she like refuses to look at this house. And so then when Tristan makes a comment about how when he adopts the boys after they get married, and like they've never talked about marriage, but like they've said I love you and stuff at this point, and she's like, that's like the final straw. She's like, you're not adopting my boys. Like, these are my previous husband's boys. They don't belong to you. No way. And it like causes this huge fight. And I'm like, okay, so she's like angry. She super lashes out. She's super hurtful to both the boys and to Tristan. I felt like it was kind of understandable where she was coming from, but so that's like sort of the black moment, the conflict for the last like quarter of the book, is that she refuses to give on this. Like, she will not allow him to adopt the boys. And her like only reasoning for this is that they're Wade's children, and that she does not want Tristan to have the power to take the boys away from her. And I'm like, this like 400 pages ago, this guy didn't want to have anything to do with you and had to really work to like be okay with even having children. Like, he basically was like, I'll suck it up and deal with the brats just so that I can be with Claire. And like now she's like, well, no, he's not adopting Wade's children because I don't want him to have the power to like take things from me, take the boys away from me. And I was like, I mean, sure, from like a legal standpoint, okay, like I kind of get that that's maybe an option. I don't know what judge would be like, oh yeah, I'm going to take the boys away from their biological mother and give them to their adopted stepfather. Maybe, sure, okay. It just didn't make any sense to me. And she just like would not budge, and they wouldn't have a conversation about it. Like, Tristan was like, look, you're 38. Like, you know, I'm potentially giving up children of my own biologically, you know, so I want to be the proper father to your boys. Like, I want to adopt them. And she's just like, nope. So I just felt like I did not understand her reasoning behind this. I felt like her reason that like Tristan might take my boys away was really stupid. She was like, I don't understand why he can't see things from my perspective. And I'm like, I don't see things from your perspective. I don't understand this. And so of course, like they have multiple like moments where they try to get back together and like have a discussion. And every time she's just like, nope. And then she's like, like we can't get back together. She was like either giggling or sobbing throughout throughout the like latter half of the book. And it just was really annoying to me. And I just felt like it was like kind of a stupid conflict. For me, I don't know. I just was like really frustrated. Yes, at one point when she's thinking about him adopting the kids, she thinks to herself, she says, I can't give him that because I know that if we ever broke up, it would be because he cheated or did something to have caused it. I would never do anything to end us. I love him too much. And in that event, there is no way in hell I would be packing up my sons to go to his house every weekend to play happy family with his new girlfriend. And I'm like, it just seemed so stupid because like she like wants him in her life, but she wants him in her life on her terms, and yet that was not like how she'd been presented throughout this book. It was just really frustrating to me, and I was like annoyed. And at the end there, when they're broken up, they both are just like sobbing left and right, eyes filling with tears left and right. Like Tristan talks about like being cut deep to the bone. He can barely draw breath. And I'm just like, okay, dude, like, heartbreak sucks. I found the writing to be like melodramatic. I found it super obnoxious that he was like so full of swear words, and he would just like literally turn about and be like, well, it's this way. And like when she's all depressed, there's one part where she is sitting there, and she says, she wakes up and she's depressed, and it's the, you know, right after the breakup, and she says, I grabbed my phone and returned to bed. I cried all night last night. I feel like I'm having a effing breakdown or something. Things can't get any worse. I do feel a little better today though, so that's something. That's all like one paragraph. I'm like, so which is it? Like you're having a breakdown or something and it's the worst you've ever felt, or you're feeling better? Like, which is it? And so I just felt like the writing was like that throughout the whole book. And I was like, okay. So I did not mean for this to be a rant. That was just my sort of hot take feelings. I just didn't really like the writing. It wasn't for me. I didn't really like the characters. I found them annoying. The children seemed to be written kind of young for me, but like, I don't have kids, so like maybe they were kind of age appropriate. I felt like Tristan super overstepped his bounds as like a potential new father. I didn't like the writing. I think I already said that multiple times. I will say that this is very sexy. There's a lot of sex scenes, and it's very explicit in a very sexy way. I will say it's kind of like rougher sex, like, which they both seem to like, and it's fully consensual and they both are enjoying it. But like, there's multiple times where he is like really rough and he's like basically telling her like, yeah, you take it, you like it. And she's just like moaning and giggling all over the place and loving it. So I don't know, it didn't read as like sexy. And even when they were like having like loving and tender moments, there wasn't like gentler, more loving sex. It was just like, how hard can you take it, baby? And I was just like, okay, all hard all the time. Sounds great. So this book wasn't really for me. And ultimately I'm going to rate it, I think 2 stars. I just felt like it was a slog and I was kind of frustrated and I rolled my eyes a lot. So yeah, I think maybe this would appeal to somebody who is like a hair older, maybe someone who has kids, maybe not. I don't know. I know it's just a romance book, but I was just like really frustrated for a lot of this book. So there you go. So if you have anything, anything to add, if you have recently read this, if you have read this book and other TL Swan books, comment down below with any of your thoughts on the writing or why I'm wrong, because I also like have been going through personal stuff. So like maybe that my own mood has affected this, but so if you have anything else to say, or if you recommend a better TL Swan book, or a book where they do children better, please comment down below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the bell and do all those interaction things. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Bye.